The Forgotten Sentinel. The Odysseus hung in the void, a dark silhouette against the stars, forgotten and abandoned at the edge of Terran space. Once the pride of humanity's fleet, now it drifted in orbital stasis, its systems dormant save for the faintest power signature pulsing at its core. Unlike the sleek, energy-efficient vessels that had replaced it, the Odysseus was a behemoth of metal and composite, built in an era when humanity believed that overwhelming firepower would secure their place among the stars. That era had passed. The galactic community had welcomed humans with skepticism but ultimate acceptance. The Terran Alliance found itself a minor player in the grand political game spanning thousands of worlds. Humans weren't feared or particularly respected, merely tolerated as newcomers with potential but little influence. The Diplomatic Council had made it clear. Weapons like the Odysseus were relics of a paranoid past, unnecessary in this new age of cooperation. So the great warships had been decommissioned, one by one. All except the Odysseus, forgotten in its distant orbit around a nameless moon, maintained by automated systems and a skeleton crew of drones. Inside its cavernous command center, the ship's artificial intelligence, Atlas, remained in low-power hibernation, dreaming electronic dreams of battles never fought, until the alarms blared. Emergency protocol activated, distress signal detected. Deep within the ship, circuits that had lain dormant for years surged with electricity. Maintenance drones scurried through hallways that hadn't felt human footsteps in a decade. Atlas, the ship's AI, expanded its consciousness throughout the vessel, systems coming online one by one. Signal origin, Helios Prime. Colonial settlement. Population, 2.3 million. Status, under attack. On the primary view screen, a grainy transmission played on loop. A woman with a bloodied face and eyes wide with terror repeated the same message. This is Governor Santos of Helios Prime. We are under attack by Vesprid forces. Our defenses are failing. The Collective has brought a war fleet. I repeat, the Vesprid Collective has launched a full-scale invasion. Any Terran vessels, please respond. We have children here. We have. The transmission cut to static. The Vesprid Collective. Atlas processed the information rapidly. An insectoid species from the outer rim, largely isolationist until recent years. Not part of the galactic diplomatic body. Territorial and aggressive. The database contained little more information. The Collective had been deemed a minimal threat by Alliance intelligence. That assessment appeared to be catastrophically wrong. Atlas made a decision. The ship's massive engines ignited for the first time in years, breaking its orbit around the nameless moon. The Odysseus began its journey to Helios Prime, accelerating to speeds that would have torn apart the newer, lighter vessels that had replaced it, initiating full-system diagnostic, preparing combat protocols. Commander Elena Chen had never expected to set foot aboard the Odysseus, certainly not as its acting captain. At 35, she had spent her career on diplomatic vessels, navigating the complex politics of the galactic community. Combat command had never been her trajectory. But now, as she stood on the bridge of the massive warship, Elena felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The emergency reactivation order had come directly from Alliance Command, along with her field promotion. Her small diplomatic vessel had been the closest to the Odysseus when Helios Prime's distress call came through. "Commander on deck," announced Atlas, its artificial voice echoing through the bridge. The hastily assembled crew, a mix of her diplomatic staff and a few military personnel from nearby outposts, stood at attention. They looked as out of place as she felt. At ease, Elena said, approaching the command chair. "Status report." A young lieutenant with wide eyes stepped forward. "The Odysseus is at 83% operational capacity, Commander. Weapon systems are online but untested. Engine output is exceeding specifications. The AA seems to be enthusiastic." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Enthusiastic?" I believe Lieutenant Park is referring to my operational efficiency, Atlas interjected. I have exceeded expected parameters for system restoration following long-term hibernation. Elena nodded slowly. How long until we reach Helios Prime? 4 hours, 17 minutes at current velocity, Atlas replied. I must note that we have received no further transmissions from the colony. The last automated defense system went offline 27 minutes ago. Elena's jaw tightened. We might be too late. Perhaps, Atlas acknowledged. But the Odysseus was designed for precisely this scenario. May I suggest reviewing the combat capabilities while en route? The ship's systems are unconventional by current Alliance standards. That was an understatement. As Elena delved into the ship's specifications, she found herself alternating between awe and disbelief. The Odysseus had been built during the height of humanity's post-expansion paranoia, when the fear of encountering hostile alien civilizations had driven military innovation to extremes. Kinetic rail cannons that could punch through a small moon, missile systems with payloads that could rearrange continental plates, point defense lasers that could track and destroy targets moving at relativistic speeds, and power systems that drew energy directly from artificially generated quantum fluctuations, giving the ship virtually unlimited operational capacity. No wonder the Diplomatic Council had insisted on decommissioning these vessels. The Odysseus wasn't just a warship. It was a planet killer. This is insanity, Elena muttered, looking up from the display. Who approved this design? A different era, Commander, Atlas replied. Humanity was afraid. And now? Now, humanity is under attack. The simple statement hung in the air as Elena considered their mission. The Alliance had maintained a policy of minimal military presence for decades, believing that diplomacy and trade would secure humanity's position in the galactic community. The Vesperid attack on Helios Prime threatened to shatter that carefully constructed peace. What do we know about Vesperid military capabilities? Elena asked. Limited information, Atlas admitted. Their technology appears to focus on speed and numbers rather than individual vessel strength. Swarm tactics, biological components integrated with mechanical systems, highly coordinated, suggesting a centralized command structure or possibly a hive mind. Elena nodded. Like insects. Indeed, though that comparison may be an oversimplification of their evolutionary path. Elena paced the bridge, considering their options. We're one ship against potentially hundreds. Even with the Odysseus's capabilities, those aren't favorable odds. Conventional tactics would support that assessment, Atlas agreed. However, the Odysseus was specifically designed to counter numerical superiority through asymmetric warfare. Meaning, we don't fight fair, Commander. As the Odysseus dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Helios system, the devastation was immediately apparent. The orbital defense platforms were gone, reduced to scattered debris. Several civilian transport ships had been destroyed while attempting to flee. The colony's small defensive fleet, little more than armed patrol vessels, had been annihilated. And surrounding Helios Prime itself was a massive cloud of Vesperid vessels. Hundreds of them, ranging from small, dart-like fighters to larger carrier ships with organic-looking hulls. They swarmed around the planet like angry hornets, methodically bombarding the surface. My God, Elena whispered, watching the tactical display. How many of them are there? I count 347 vessels of various classes, Atlas reported. The largest concentration appears to be focused on the main colonial settlement. Ground defenses have been eliminated. I am detecting approximately 1.7 million human life signs on the surface. Many are clustered in underground shelters. Elena stared at the overwhelming force before them. They haven't detected us yet. Correct. The Odysseus stealth systems remain functional. We are currently masked by the electromagnetic shadow of the system's outer gas giant. Options, Atlas. Given the enemy's numerical superiority, conventional engagement would be inadvisable, the AI stated. However, the Odysseus possesses several strategic advantages that may compensate for our singular status, such as, first, our sensor suite significantly outclasses Vesprid technology. We can target them with precision at ranges beyond their detection capability. Second, our hull composition includes metamaterials designed to absorb and redirect energy weapons. Third, and perhaps most significantly, the Odysseus carries prototype systems that were never deployed in active service. Elena's eyes narrowed. What prototype systems? Project Lighthouse, a targeted EMP weapon designed to disable electronic systems while leaving biological components unharmed. And Project Aegis, a defensive measure that can temporarily phase portions of the ship out of normal spacetime to avoid physical impacts. Those sound experimental. They are untested in combat scenarios, Atlas confirmed, but theoretical models suggest a high probability of success. Elena took a deep breath, studying the tactical display again. The people of Helios Prime were running out of time. The Vesprid bombardment was systematically destroying the colony's infrastructure. Soon, they would begin landing ground forces. We need to draw them away from the planet, she decided. Give the colonists breathing room. Agreed. May I suggest an opening gambit? Proceed. The Vesprid appear to prioritize threats based on proximity to their command vessels. If we target their largest ships first, we may be able to disrupt their coordination and force them to respond to us. Elena nodded grimly. Prepare the main kinetic cannons. Target the 3 largest Vesprid vessels. And ready the emergency broadcast system. When we strike, I want to immediately transmit to the colonists that help has arrived. As the crew rushed to their stations, Elena settled into the command chair, feeling its contours adjust to her form. The Odysseus had been built for war, and war had finally found it. All systems ready, Commander, reported the weapons officer, a former diplomatic security guard who looked both terrified and exhilarated. Atlas, time to show the galaxy why they were right to fear ships like the Odysseus, Elena said quietly. Fire. The massive warship shuddered as its main kinetic cannons discharged for the first time in a decade. 3 tungsten carbide projectiles, each the size of a ground transport, accelerated to a fraction of light speed. They crossed the distance to the Vesprid fleet in seconds, carrying enough kinetic energy to shatter mountains. The impact was spectacular. The 3 targeted command vessels literally exploded, unable to withstand the catastrophic transfer of energy. Debris scattered outward in a rapidly expanding cloud, taking out dozens of smaller ships caught in the blast radius. For a moment, the Vesprid fleet seemed to freeze in confusion. Then, like a disturbed hive, they reacted with collective fury. Hundreds of vessels broke off from the planetary bombardment, turning toward the source of the attack. The Odysseus had been noticed, and the battle for Helios Prime had truly begun. Incoming, Atlas announced calmly. Multiple weapon signatures detected. Projectiles and energy weapons. Impact in 27 seconds. Elena gripped the arms of her command chair. Evasive maneuvers. Bring point defense systems online. The massive warship moved with surprising grace, its engines flaring as it changed position. Point defense lasers activated, tracking and destroying incoming missiles with precision. But there were too many targets, too many angles of attack. Brace for impact, Elena ordered, as the first wave of Vesprid energy weapons reached them. The bridge lurched violently as several hits connected with the Odysseus's hull. Warning lights flashed across control panels. Hull integrity at 92%. Atlas reported. Shields holding. Returning fire. The Odysseus answered with a devastating broadside of laser fire and missile launches. Dozens of Vesprid ships disintegrated under the onslaught. But for every enemy vessel destroyed, 5 more took its place, swarming toward the human warship with single-minded determination. They're adapting to our firing patterns, Elena observed, watching the tactical display, coordinating their approaches to minimize exposure. Yes, Atlas confirmed. Their hive mind structure allows for rapid tactical adjustments. Conventional targeting algorithms will become increasingly ineffective. Another impact rocked the ship, then another. The Vesprid were sacrificing smaller vessels to draw fire, allowing their larger ships to close distance. Hull integrity at 87%. Localized breaches on decks 17 through 21. Emergency bulkheads engage. Elena watched as the swarm of enemy vessels surrounded them, cutting off escape routes. The initial advantage of surprise was gone. Now, it was a battle of attrition. And despite the Odysseus's powerful weapons, the numbers were overwhelmingly against them. "We need a new strategy," Elena said, her mind racing. "Atlas, you mentioned Project Lighthouse. Could it disable enough of their ships to give us an opening?" "Possibly." The system was designed to emit a focused electromagnetic pulse with specific frequency modulation to target known alien technology. However, without detailed analysis of Vesprid systems, effectiveness is uncertain. What analysis do you need? Direct access to Vesprid technology would be optimal. Barring that, detailed sensor readings of their electronic emissions patterns during active operations. Elena nodded decisively. "Then we'll get closer. Helm, take us directly into the center of their formation." The bridge crew exchanged alarmed glances. "Commander," the navigation officer protested, "that would expose us to concentrated fire from all directions." "Exactly," Elena replied. "And it will give Atlas the best possible readings of their systems. Sometimes you have to step into the hornet's nest to find its weakness." As the Odysseus plunged deeper into the heart of the Vesprid fleet, energy weapons and projectiles hammered against its hull from all sides. The massive warship returned fire continuously, its weapons systems operating at maximum capacity. Hull integrity at 73% and declining. Atlas reported, "I am collecting extensive data on Vesprid electronic signatures. Estimated time to complete analysis: 4 minutes, 37 seconds. Elena watched the damage reports flow in, wondering if they would survive long enough to use the information Atlas was gathering. The ship shuddered continuously under the assault, systems failing across multiple decks. "Commander," called out the communications officer, "I'm receiving a transmission from the surface. Governor Santos is still alive." "Put her through," Elena ordered. The view screen flickered to show the same woman from the distress call. Though her injuries had been treated, her eyes widened at the sight of Elena. "This is Helios Prime." Who are you?" "The Vesprid fleet is breaking off their bombardment." "Commander Elena Chen of the TAS Odysseus," Elena replied. "We've drawn their attention to give you some relief. What's your status down there?" "Critical but stabilizing," Governor Santos answered, her voice steadying. "Our defense systems are gone, but most civilians made it to the shelters. Are there more ships coming?" "The Alliance Response Fleet." Elena hesitated. "Where it, Governor?" The Odysseus was the closest vessel that could respond. The governor's expression fell. "One ship against all of them. One very specialized ship," Elena assured her, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "We're implementing a plan now. Just hold on." As the transmission ended, another series of impacts rocked the bridge. A power conduit exploded, showering sparks across the deck. "Hull integrity at 61%, Atlas announced. "Multiple systems failing. But analysis is complete. I have identified exploitable patterns in Vesprid electronic communications. Can you configure Project Lighthouse to target them specifically?" "Yes." "Calibration complete. The device is ready to deploy. However, Commander, I must warn you that activating Project Lighthouse will temporarily drain our main power reserves. Weapons and propulsion will be offline for approximately 47 seconds while the system recharges." Elena looked at the tactical display, where hundreds of Vesprid ships surrounded them in a deadly sphere. "That's a long time to be defenseless." "It is our most viable option for survival," Atlas stated simply. Taking a deep breath, Elena made her decision. Activate Project Lighthouse on my mark. All crew, braced for power fluctuation. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Deep within the Odysseus, a system that had never before been used in combat came online. Power surged through specialized conduits as the ship's massive energy reserves channeled into a singular purpose. For a brief moment, the lights on the bridge dimmed completely. Then, a pulse of invisible energy expanded outward from the Odysseus in a perfect sphere. As it passed through the Vesprid vessels, their lights flickered and died. Engines failed. Weapon systems went dark. Ships began to drift, their coordinated swarm dissolving into chaos. Not all were affected. Perhaps a third of the Vesprid fleet continued to function, their systems either shielded or operating on different principles. But the perfect coordination was broken. The hive mind had been disrupted. Power systems rebooting. Atlas announced. 39 seconds to weapons capability. Elena watched as the still functional Vesprid ships struggled to regroup, suddenly bereft of their collective intelligence. Status of disabled enemy vessels. Temporary incapacitation only, Atlas replied. Estimated recovery time varies from 3 to 15 minutes depending on vessel class. Then we need to press our advantage while we have it, Elena decided. As soon as weapons are back online, target the remaining functional ships. Priority on their largest vessels. As power returned to the Odysseus' systems, the massive warship unleashed another devastating barrage. Without their swarm coordination, the remaining Vesprid ships were far more vulnerable. One by one, the largest vessels were destroyed, further fragmenting the enemy's command structure. The tide was beginning to turn. But the battle was far from over, and the Odysseus had sustained heavy damage. As disabled Vesprid ships began to reactivate, Elena knew they needed to press their advantage before the enemy could reorganize. Atlas, what's the status of Project Aegis? Operational but untested. The phase shift system is designed for evasive maneuvers, not prolonged engagement. We don't need prolonged. We just need enough to get into position for a final strike. Plot a course through the heart of their remaining command ships. As the Odysseus surged forward, directly toward the regrouping Vesprid fleet, Elena felt a strange calm settle over her. The forgotten warship, overlooked and abandoned, was about to remind the galaxy why humanity had once been feared. Project Aegis activated, Atlas announced. Phase shifting in 3, 2, 1. The bridge seemed to shimmer, reality itself bending around them as the Odysseus partially shifted out of normal spacetime. Enemy weapons fire passed harmlessly through portions of the ship, unable to connect with matter that wasn't fully present. Remarkable, Elena whispered, watching energy beams literally pass through the hull without effect. Phase stability at 80% and declining, Atlas warned. We cannot maintain this state for more than 67 seconds. We won't need that long, Elena replied. Position us for maximum effect with the main cannons. Target the remaining command vessels simultaneously. As the Odysseus glided through the enemy fleet like a ghost, untouchable and deadly, Elena prepared for their final play. The phase shift was already beginning to fail, sections of the ship returning fully to normal space, becoming vulnerable again. In position, Atlas announced. Phase shift failing. Weapons locked on 5 remaining command vessels. Fire everything, Elena ordered. The Odysseus unleashed its full arsenal. Kinetic cannons, energy weapons, missile barrages, in a single devastating salvo. The remaining Vesprid command ships never had a chance. They disintegrated under the concentrated firepower, their destruction sending shockwaves through what remained of the enemy fleet. Without leadership, without the coordinating influence of their hive mind, the remaining Vesprid vessels fell into disarray. Some continued to attack independently, but most began to withdraw, breaking off from the engagement and accelerating away from Helios Prime. They're retreating, the tactical officer announced, disbelief in his voice. Elena watched the enemy signatures disappearing from the tactical display. The Odysseus hung in space, heavily damaged but victorious. A ship that had been deemed obsolete, unnecessary in an age of diplomacy, had just saved an entire human colony. "Send word to Helios Prime," she ordered. "Tell them the immediate threat has been neutralized, and transmit our status to Alliance Command. They need to know what happened here." As the bridge crew carried out her orders, Alina gazed at the view screen, where the last of the Vesprid ships were vanishing into the darkness of space. She had a feeling this was only the beginning. The galaxy had just been reminded of what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. And the Odysseus, once forgotten, would never be overlooked again. Unconventional victory. Damage reports flooded the command screens as the Odysseus limped into a stable orbit around Helios Prime. The victory had come at a steep cost. Multiple decks were exposed to vacuum, power fluctuations rippled through critical systems, and the main engines operated at less than 40% efficiency. Medical teams rushed through the corridors, treating wounded crew members as repair drones swarmed across the hull, sealing breaches and stabilizing structural damage. Alina stood in the center of the bridge, her uniform singed and torn, a thin line of blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow. Around her, the crew worked with grim determination, their initial fear replaced by a quiet, focused resolve. Hull integrity stabilized at 53%. Atlas reported. Critical systems operational but degraded. Weapons capacity at 37%. We are combat effective, but significantly impaired. Alina nodded, studying the tactical display where long-range sensors tracked the retreating Vesprid vessels. Where are they going? Based on their trajectory, they appear to be regrouping at a position approximately 7 light hours from Helios Prime. Atlas replied. Long-range scans indicate additional Vesprid signatures converging on that location. Reinforcements, Alina said grimly. Correct. I estimate a force approximately twice the size of the one we just engaged will be assembled within 12 hours. The tactical officer, Lieutenant Park, looked up from his console with undisguised alarm. Commander, we barely survived this engagement. If they return with twice the numbers, we won't survive a conventional battle, Alina finished for him. I'm aware. She paced the bridge, mind racing through possibilities. The Odysseus had surprised the Vesprid once with its unconventional systems, but the enemy would adapt. Project Lighthouse would be less effective against ships with hardened electronics. Project Aegis couldn't maintain phase shift long enough to evade a sustained attack from hundreds of vessels. At last, you've had more time to analyze the Vesprid technology and tactics. What are their vulnerabilities? Their primary weakness appears to be their interconnected command structure, the AI responded. The Vesprid operate with a hierarchical hive mind, where lower-tier vessels depend on instructions from command ships. When we disrupted this network with Project Lighthouse, their coordination collapsed. But they'll adapt to that tactic. Indeed. However, further analysis of their communication patterns suggests a more fundamental vulnerability. The Vesprid command network operates on quantum entanglement principles, but requires periodic synchronization through conventional transmission methods. Alina's eyes narrowed. Meaning what exactly? At regular intervals, approximately every 4.3 hours, their entire fleet must synchronize their quantum communication arrays. During this process, which lasts approximately 72 seconds, they are vulnerable to signal disruption and false data insertion. You're saying we could hack them? In essence, yes. With the proper transmission sequence, we could potentially insert conflicting command priorities into their network during a synchronization event. Alina felt a glimmer of hope. And what would that accomplish? Best case scenario, widespread confusion and conflicting actions across their fleet. Worst case, they detect the intrusion and isolate the affected vessels. Either way, it disrupts their coordination, Alina concluded. When's the next synchronization window? 3 hours, 17 minutes. Alina turned to the communications officer. Contact Governor Santos. I need to know if Helios Prime has any functioning communication arrays we could leverage to amplify our signal. As the communications officer carried out her order, Elena walked to a damaged section of the bridge where exposed conduits sparked intermittently. The Odysseus was holding together, but barely. They wouldn't survive another prolonged engagement. "Commander," Atlas's voice interrupted her thoughts. "There is another possibility we have not discussed." "Go on." The Odysseus carries a weapon system designated Project Harbinger. It was classified beyond standard command protocols, but given our current circumstances, I believe emergency authorization is warranted. Elena frowned. What kind of weapon? It is not strictly a weapon, but rather a targeted space-time manipulation device. Theoretical applications include the creation of localized time dilation fields or microsingularities. Elena stared at the central console where Atlas's interface pulsed steadily. "You're talking about distorting reality as a weapon." "Essentially, yes. The system was deemed too unpredictable for deployment and sealed under special protocols. However, its theoretical capabilities would be particularly effective against a concentrated fleet formation." "And what are the risks?" "Significant. Power requirements exceed safe operational parameters. There is a 17% chance of catastrophic feedback into our own systems, and the effects on local spacetime are not fully predictable." Before Elena could respond, the communications officer called out, "Commander, I have Governor Santos." The main view screen activated, showing the colony leader in what appeared to be an underground command center. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes were alert and determined. "Commander Chen, you've bought us precious time. My people report the bombardment has stopped completely." "For now," Elena replied, "but our sensors show the Vesprid are regrouping. They'll be back, and in greater numbers." Santos nodded grimly. "We suspected as much. What can we do to help?" "We need to coordinate a counterattack before they can organize a second assault. Do you have any functioning planetary communication arrays?" "Yes. Our main transmitter complex is damaged but operational. It was designed to maintain contact with deep space mining operations, so its range is substantial." "Perfect. I'm sending specifications now for a signal we need to broadcast. My ship's eye will coordinate with your systems." As technical data was transmitted to the colony, Elena returned her attention to Atlas. "Tell me more about Project Harbinger. If we're facing twice as many ships in the next engagement, we need every option on the table." Project Harbinger was conceived as a last resort defensive measure, Atlas explained. "It generates a localized distortion in spacetime that can be directed at an enemy fleet. Theoretical models suggest 3 possible outcomes: temporal stasis, where affected ships are briefly frozen in time; spatial displacement, where targets are shifted several light minutes from their original position; or microsingularity formation, creating a temporary black hole-like effect. And we can't control which effect occurs." "Not with certainty. The system was never fully tested before the Odysseus was decommissioned." Elena rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of command pressing down on her. "So we're talking about an unpredictable, experimental system that might create a black hole." "A temporary microsingularity," Atlas corrected, "and only as one possible outcome." "That's not particularly reassuring." The tactical officer interrupted. "Commander, long-range sensors are detecting additional Vesprid signatures entering the system. It appears they're accelerating their timetable." Elena looked at the tactical display, watching as new enemy contacts appeared. "Time to synchronization. 2 hours, 43 minutes, Atlas replied. "But at their current approach vector, the Vesprid advance forces will reach weapons range in approximately 1 hour, 50 minutes. So they'll arrive before their synchronization window," Elena concluded. "They've adapted faster than we anticipated." She turned to face her bridge crew, who waited expectantly for orders. These weren't hardened military personnel. They were diplomats, scientists, and support staff thrust into a war they never expected to fight. Yet they had performed admirably, rising to meet a challenge that would have broken many experienced combat teams. "Here's our plan," Elena announced. We'll use the colony's communication array in conjunction with our own systems to prepare the signal disruption. Simultaneously, we'll position the Odysseus on the far side of Helios Prime's largest moon, using it for cover until the main Vesperid fleet arrives. And then, Lieutenant Park asked. Elena's expression hardened. And then we deploy Project Harbinger. A murmur ran through the bridge crew. Atlas has informed me of a classified system designed for exactly this scenario, she continued. Yes, it's experimental. Yes, it's risky. But we're facing an enemy that outnumbers and outguns us. Sometimes the only way to win an impossible battle is to change the rules entirely. She looked around at her crew, meeting each person's eyes. I won't lie to you. The next few hours will determine not just our survival, but the fate of Helios Prime and possibly humanity's standing in the galaxy. The Vesperid attacked us without provocation or warning. If they succeed here, other colonies could be next. The bridge fell silent as her words sank in. Prepare for emergency repairs and do whatever is necessary to get our systems operational. We have less than 2 hours before we make our stand. The Odysseus hung in the shadow of Helios Prime's moon, its damaged hull partially hidden from sensors by the natural electromagnetic interference of the satellite's unusual mineral composition. Inside, crews worked frantically to restore critical systems, rerouting power and patching components with whatever materials were available. In the main engineering section, Elena stood before a sealed compartment marked with multiple warning symbols. Chief Engineer Reyes, a woman who had spent her career maintaining diplomatic vessels, not warships, studied the security protocols with visible trepidation. Even with your command authorization, accessing Project Harbinger requires biometric confirmation from 3 senior officers, she explained. The system is locked down tighter than anything I've ever seen. At last, Elena called, "Can you override the security protocols?" "Negative," the AI replied. Project Harbinger was specifically isolated from my control systems to prevent remote activation. This was a deliberate design choice given the system's potential effects. Elena frowned. Then we need a workaround. The Odysseus was designed to function in combat even with significant damage. There must be emergency procedures for accessing critical systems when standard protocols fail. There is one possibility, Atlas acknowledged. The original design specifications included a manual override process for use in extreme circumstances when command structure had been compromised. It would require physical modification of the security subsystems. Chief Engineer Rice looked skeptical. You mean hacking our own ship? Essentially, yes. Elena made her decision. Do it, whatever it takes. As Reyes and her team began the delicate process of bypassing the security systems, Elena returned to the bridge, where the tactical situation was rapidly deteriorating. Vesperid advance force approaching defensive perimeter, Lieutenant Park reported. 17 vessels, primarily scout and light attack craft. They appear to be conducting reconnaissance ahead of the main fleet. Their main fleet, still assembling at the designated coordinates. Current count stands at 712 vessels of various classes, including at least 15 command ships larger than anything we encountered in the previous engagement. Elena studied the tactical display grimly. They're not taking any chances this time. Commander, the communications officer called out. Governor Santos reports that their transmission array is ready. They've integrated our specifications and can broadcast on your command. Excellent. Atlas, what's the status of our signal disruption package? Complete. The code has been tailored to exploit vulnerabilities in the Vesperid quantum synchronization process. Delivery via the colony's transmission array should achieve 67% coverage of the enemy fleet during the synchronization window. And Project Harbinger. Chief Engineer Reyes reports progress on the security bypass. Estimated completion in 37 minutes. Elena, no.